Hey everyone, so today's video is going to be another Q&A. So these videos are my absolute favorite to film because they're chatty and just in general pretty fun to answer your questions. So if you have questions for the next Q&A, leave them in the comments and I will save them for a future video. I'm thinking of doing Q&As monthly. So I asked you to ask me questions on my Google form, which I posted on my community tab, and I also put out the same call on my Tumblr. I didn't get to all of the questions, so I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. Feel free to post it in the comments and I'll try my best to get to it in the next video. So the first question for this video is, any short story reading recommendations? I've been enjoying reading shorter works lately, and I was wondering what your favorites were. I'm not about to gatekeep my list of favorite short stories. I'll give you the entire list. I will leave all of the relevant links in the description. Most of these stories are free to read online. I think it's only like one or two that are only available like in print or in a collection. So these are my recommendations. The Extra by Michael Christie, Tapka by David Bismosgis, L'étranger by Eliza Robertson, Sea Life by Eliza Robertson, Slingshot by Suvankam Tamavongsa, which is my favorite short story of all time, Randy Travis by Suvankam Tamavongsa, Yeti Hunting on Mount Seymour by Sophie Crocker, We Walked on Water by Eliza Robertson, Dead Girls by Emily Jeminder, Father's Milk by Louise Erdrich, Wishbone by my friend Shaylin Bishop, Hold Me Under Till I See the Light by Shaylin Bishop, I Will Never Tell You This by Shaylin Bishop, Simple Recipes by Madeline Tien, Doppel by Sharon Bela, Six Things My Father Taught Me About Bears by Leah Mole, Cathedral by Raymond Carver, Daughters of the Air by Kate McQuaid, Cannibal by Netanya Ann Pulley, All Those Infinite Variations by Elaine Vandergeld, which is also another all-time fave, When It's Over, No Tear Shampoo by Christina Ten, Honey Pie by Catherine Rose, Fruit Selection by Lucy Zhang, which is so good, Miracle Polish by Stephen Milhauser, Property of Neil by Taya Mutonji, another fave, The Years of My Birth by Louise Erdrich, and Looking at Swans by Sophie McCreish. So that's my list. The next question is, do you have any tips about writing microfiction? So I wouldn't say I'm a pro at microfiction. I've only written like a handful of micro stories. Most of them are flash, so much longer than micro. But because I just got off of short story recommendations, I thought I'd recommend a book, and I'm sure if you're into microfiction, you've heard of this one, but my recommendation is Microfiction, an anthology of really short stories. I'll link it in the description. I was actually at my grandparents' house and I saw my uncle had a copy of this book and I was like, whoa, microfiction. I really want to check this out. And dude, there are so many good stories in there. There's one story and it's leaving my brain right now, but it's one sentence and it's just like a paragraph. It's fantastic. I will leave the name of it in the description, but if you can get a hold of it, I mean, there's just so much good microfiction in one place. I don't have enough experience to give tips on microfiction just yet, but that's a really good read if you haven't picked it up just yet. I have an idea I want to create several works in progresses out of, but the concepts are too similar and I can't choose which to create. Do you have any tips on how to deal with this, and have you had any similar problems? First, I think it's totally okay to write very similar things. Like, a lot of writers dedicate their lives to just writing one topic. I think when you're first starting out with writing, there's a huge push to have a lot of variety in what you write. And while I think that's really important, I do think it'll help you learn. At one point, at least in my experience, and I think in a lot of writers' experiences, you find the thing that you really like to write, and like that's just what you write most of the time. So it's okay to write similar concepts. But if you're having trouble picking between like similar ideas, I would say just go with the one that you couldn't see yourself not writing. So for example, if you ask somebody, hey, out of these two ideas, which one should I write? You probably have an idea in your mind of the one that you want to write. And I would go with that one. If you don't know which one to write, regardless of that, I would just pick one. I mean, it's not going to hurt to start one. And if it's not working out, you can just go choose a different idea. I wouldn't worry too much about the idea selection because really the story comes alive when you actually write it, not necessarily when you're just thinking about it. So the next question is a really good question. Do you think authortube as a creator has affected your writing in any way, either positively or negatively? For example, do you think your writing journey would be any different if you hadn't started authortube? I hadn't thought of the answer to this question like ever, and so I thought this was a really great question. I don't know. I think every decision that you make impacts your life in some way, whether big or small, whether long-term or short-term. And so, of course, I do think being an authortuber has impacted my writing. I've been scripting a video. Let me know if you want to see it. I feel like it would probably only appeal to a small like pool of people who are authortubers, but let me know. I was going to make a video on like the difficulties of kind of being like an online writing creator because I love making writing content, but it can be difficult. And I think one of the bigger things when I was first starting out was, feeling like I couldn't change a lot of things in my work because I'd already shared them online, feeling like people were kind of watching my work or judging my work. And as I've gotten older and as I've been on authortube longer, I don't care as much about that, but it's still freaky, like to the point where I've stopped posting like a lot of my work. I also don't post my work for other reasons like plagiarism. I'm just gonna say plagiarism. But yeah, I think a huge negative impact is that, you feel like you're watched. In a lot of cases, I think that's how like the writing industry kind of is nowadays. Like publishers, for marketing reasons and stuff, they want writers to have some sort of online presence. They want people to be looking and reading your work. And so I think it's kind of inevitable in that way, if you are sharing your writing online or in publications, that you're going to feel like you're being watched, because it's kind of true. It's not necessarily wholly negative, because it's made me learn the opinion that matters the most is my own. Being overly critical of my work so that it hurts less if other people are critical of it is just not productive. It stopped me from writing a lot. This hasn't bothered me in a number of years. Like I would say this was huge for me in like 2020, 2019, 2020. It's kind of bigger for me where like I felt a lot of pressure because of, the kind of content that I make. I know that there's kind of this thing of like, oh, do author tubers follow their own advice? I don't really worry too much about that, because I think the art of giving advice, like teaching, and the art of writing and actually doing the thing are very different things. Like, for example, I think I'm a pretty good visual artist. I think I'm good at visual art. I would be a terrible teacher at visual art. And the same thing goes with guitar. Like, I think I'm pretty good at guitar. I'm like, I can learn guitar. I'm okay at guitar. I would be a horrible teacher at guitar. I don't think you necessarily have to, be perfect at writing in order to be a teacher. Honestly, I would not actually want to listen to a teacher who is perfect at what they do. I think the best teachers can understand their own weaknesses and, how to spot that in their own work, and how to kind of advise their students and also advise themselves. I certainly don't hold myself to that standard. If I'm making a video, I am only really making it because I feel comfortable talking on that topic. I don't necessarily feel pressure like to follow every piece of advice I give in a YouTube video, because it's advice and you can't create writing out of pieces of advice. If you are creating your writing solely off of advice, I might caution that a little bit. I know that's also advice, so this is getting a little bit meta. But yeah, creating writing based off of just advice doesn't leave enough room for, your expression. But anyway, that's a different conversation. But I've been an authortuber for a really, really long time. It kind of struck me, a couple of months ago how long I've been doing this. So I made my first authortube video when I was in grade 10. I was 15. If we're counting like the first vlog, the first one with my face in it. Yeah, I was so young, and I'm turning 21 in September. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I've also only been writing since I was 13. So I've been kind of an authortuber for as long as I've been writing, almost. By the time I was 15, I'd already written like a ton of books anyway. So I guess not really, but still, in terms of the time, I have been writing almost for exactly as long as I've been doing authortube. So I haven't really noticed a difference in the journey, but I'm sure for other people that could be kind of debilitating. I think for me, at the end of the day, I have tried less and less as an authortuber to like apologize for my work or say, oh, it's not finished, or, oh, I know it's not good. Because like, why do other people need to know that that's how I feel? Or is that really how I feel? If other people have opinions like that, they'll leave them in your comments, and then you can just delete the comment if you don't like it. And I know that's easier said than done, but you're so incredibly talented and your writing style is so soothing and harmonious. How did you nail your writing style / what tips do you have for getting to know yourself as a writer? This is such a nice comment. Thank you very much. I'm so happy that you think my writing is soothing and harmonious. That's very nice. How I nailed my writing style is I wrote for a really long time, and not even that long. I think in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that long in my life, but it felt like a long time. I think I was writing for like 4 straight years before I started to notice that I had a style. It took about 2 years after that for me to feel like I developed that style a bit. And it's only really like the last couple of months, last year and a half maybe, that I felt like, okay, this is my style for now. And I don't want to talk about this too much because my sister and I have decided to make a podcast episode for our podcast Double Spaced about finding writing style, because this question really inspired me. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of writers or newer writers might be hunting for something that they already have. You have a natural writing style. No matter what, if you're a writer, you have a writing style. And so really to nail it, it just took a lot of practice. I didn't really do anything on purpose. I happened to find writing that made me kind of excited. And when I found that writing, I read a lot of it, and then I wrote a lot, and then I continued to read a couple of other things, and then I didn't need to read as much of other people's work to feel like I could write in my style. I eventually found my own style like through that exploration. But my tips for getting to know yourself as a writer is to give yourself time. I think it's really hard in the beginning to be like, what do you mean I'm going to be writing like this for the next couple of years? It took me 4 years. So what do you mean it's going to take me 4 years? I don't have 4 years. And, time is precious. So I totally understand feeling that way. But I think at the end of the day, writing really is like kind of a patient skill. It takes time. And so I know it's kind of an annoying answer, but at the end of the day, practice a lot. How do you know if a scene is melodramatic or the right amount of dramatic? So I think this is really hard to tell when you're the writer, especially in the beginning. You kind of have to develop a certain objectivity of your writing, and I think that also takes time. I would get a second opinion if you can. I would look out for abstractions and then remove those if you don't need them, because abstractions are probably going to be the obvious sign. You can look at the length of the scene and see if you're like on one emotion for too long, or, the proportion. So are you on a certain emotion for like 5 of the 8 paragraphs? Maybe that might point to melodrama. I have an important exam coming up that might determine my life, and so I won't be able to dedicate time for writing. I feel awful about not writing because I need to spend all my time studying for the exams, but not writing is really bothering me mentally. Is there any advice you have for this situation? So I think the number one advice is your life is more important than writing. I know a lot of people might disagree with me on that, but I think your life should be prioritized. Your education, academics should certainly be prioritized, because writing will always be there for you. But I understand like the feeling of like, I don't feel good when I'm not writing. I feel exactly, whoever said this question, we are on the same wavelength, because I feel the exact same way when I'm not writing. I'm like, I can't write because I'm too busy, but also not writing makes me feel like shit. Study for that exam, prioritize that exam, and know that writing is going to be there for you afterward. If you can take 10 minutes a day to write, like that could help. Like a 10-minute break from studying, you can write, or right before you go to bed, you can write. This is the kind of stuff that happens. I think it's really hard for me to accept that, like when I was a bit younger. I'm not sure how old the asker is, obviously, but as I've gotten older and as I've had more responsibilities on my plate, I've realized that, yeah, like writing isn't the only thing that I can do in a day. Honestly, I don't often have time to do writing. I've been wanting to write personally for me for the last 2-3 days, and I haven't had the time to do it. So I think as you get older, these things kind of change, and accepting that was really, really difficult for me. But when I did, it started to bother me less, because I realized like there's just some things that are a little bit out of my control. Do you have any advice for writing consistently? I put this question right after the other one because I thought they tied in quite well. Writing consistently, if you want to write consistently, I think it's all about realistic goals. So sometimes I don't have time to write consistently. Like I said, I'm a full-time student. So what I'll do is if I know I have a free weekend or a free day, I'll make kind of like a larger scale goal. I think I talked about this in one of my recent videos. I'll link it, where I was basically like, if I know that I'm going to be home for a weekend, I'd rather write 5,000 words in that weekend than write like 100 words every single day when I don't really have time. So that works for me personally. And so it's not consistent, but it means that I'm writing the same amount. It just works better for my schedule. But if you want to write more consistently, really it's just about those bite-sized goals. Hey, I want to write 100 words at 2 p.m. every single day, which is my lunch break, for example. I also would recommend ending in the middle of a scene. I wouldn't end at the end of a scene. I think starting scenes and finishing scenes is kind of hard. So if you want to write consistently, if you can finish, like stop in the middle of something, like in the middle of a dialogue or in the middle of like some narrative, rather than at the end, it could make the next day like easier to get into. I really enjoy the way you create atmosphere. How do you come up with small surrounding details to manufacture an atmosphere that is completely imaginary? I don't really really do anything on purpose. I think this is just like kind of like a natural part of my writing style. Really, I think it's about developing your writer's eye, and I think that takes time, but also it could be needing to be a more observant person. So if you're trying to create more atmosphere in your writing, you have to think about the senses. So sometimes if I'm trying to write a field, I would just slow down, just stand in the field for a bit. What do you see, smell, taste, etc., and then write those details down and see if you can integrate them into your work. Injecting kind of setting details throughout a scene rather than just in like a giant chunk at the beginning, which is what I used to do, can be helpful in maintaining that sense of atmosphere. Your videos make for great company, and you're such a good writer. How do you keep your story momentum going and never let the plot or dialogue get boring? First of all, I'm so happy that you think my videos are really great company, but how do I keep my story momentum going and never let the plot or dialogue get boring? The truth is, I do not. My plot gets boring, my dialogue gets boring, everything gets super boring and static and cardboardy and nasty and gross at so many points while I'm writing. But the thing about developing as a writer is acknowledging that happens and then just moving on, because I think the moment that you start like sitting down and like really focusing on that is when you can't progress. And I find that just moving on from those moments and doing my best to kind of push through them is what's the most helpful. For example, I have been writing this terrible cardboard scene in Seventh Virtue, and I think I've been writing it since I was at school, so it's probably taken me like 2 months to like kind of get through. It's not really one scene, but it's pretty long, but anyway, it's just taken me so long to get from point A to B, and I still haven't finished it. So what I tried to remind myself is just to get out of there as quickly as possible, because I can come back. But that's the thing, your story is going to get boring and your dialogue is going to get boring at points. That's very normal, and that's what revision is for. You can remove those things or you can spice them up later on. Do you have any tips on writing endings? I can never think of an ending and would appreciate some advice. Sarah and I actually want to make a podcast video. This is one of our ideas because she has some really great ideas on endings. I feel like I'm not really an endings pro, but the only advice I really have for endings are that it's going to be like an inevitable event or occurrence. Everything in the book or the story leads up to that ending. Whatever feels like the most natural, intrinsic, intuitive end is where I end stories. Sometimes, like most of the time, when I end books, I didn't even realize the book had ended. It's just like a natural feeling. I'm like, oh, that's the end. And I follow that instinct. If you're not a super intuitive writer, that might not be very helpful. So if anybody else has tips on endings, let me know. But again, I will start brainstorming as we ramp up for that episode, which we're trying to get on the podcast and like kind of create more of it. So look out for it. It's posted on this YouTube channel. I'm going to try to get it on like iTunes and Spotify too. So the final question for this video is, what's one of your favorite scenes you've read and or written? So read, I have a couple of them. I'm the worst at answering this question because I don't have a really good long-term memory. Like some things I'll remember like long-term that are super random, but most of the time, like I don't remember a lot of things. So I don't really remember what I read or what I write. Sometimes I just remember like the overall kind of mood. But anyways, so that's why I don't have a really great answer for this. But a couple of scenes that I was thinking about, there is a scene in Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson, which is like top 3 favorite novels. I'm not going to give any spoilers, so this is going to be hard to explain. But if you know, you know. The narrator is kind of talking about their uncle. I'll never forget it. It's really good. If you know, you know. It's fantastic. That book is just a masterclass in craft. Eden Robinson is insanely talented at what she does. There is also a fantastic scene in Eliza Robertson's Demigods, which is one of my favorite novels. It's one of my most read novels too, but anyway, it's a scene where the narrator Willa is in a grocery store with her stepbrother Patrick, and it's so good. There's so much tension. It's electrically tense. I haven't read History of Wolves by Emily Fridland in a long time, but a scene that I've never been able to forget, there are 2. There's a scene, like, I think on a boat, the teacher's on a boat. If you've read this book, you would know that scene's fantastic. And again, the electric tenseness in that scene. And there's also a hotel stay in Duluth that's just, ooh, if you've read that book, you know. Final scene of short story that I mentioned, Randy Travis by Suvankam Tamavangsa. Dude, my heart is just broken. The final scene of The Girls by Emma Cline is the perfect ending to that book, I think. It's just fabulous. But my favorite scene of all time is not something I have read or written. It is what I've watched. It is the season 2 finale of Hannibal. If you have watched the scene, you know the scene that I'm talking about. I love that scene and I rewatch it all the time. In terms of the favorite scenes that I've written, I don't know. I don't remember my writing. I remember that I have had favorite things and I should probably put them in a document, but I don't remember them at all now that it's been a couple of years. I know historically, chapter 14 of Fostered, like the first book, was my favorite thing ever for a really long time. I wrote that when I was 13. I haven't read it in a long time, but historically that was one of my favorite things. There's a scene in chapter 8 of Feeding Habits where Harrison takes Lonan onto a boat. I don't know if it's like one of my all-time favorites, but I think it's kind of sneaky and I like that moment a lot. And then I recently wrote a scene in Seventh Virtue in Reeve's point of view that I really like that I'm thinking I can convert into a short story. If you want to hear me read some of my favorite work that I've written to you, check out the video that I just posted recently and it has a whole bunch of excerpts in it. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for everyone who asked questions. If you have questions for the next one, leave them in the comments. I will also post a Google form, etc. Do the whole shebang like I always do when it is time for the next Q&A. But for now, let me know what you've been working on in the comments below and I will see you in another video. Bye.